Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we welcome Dr. Terry Grier. Dr. Grier is superintendent of the Houston Independent School District, and David, a well-known national educator.
And he's been here for a couple of years, but I wager, Dr. Grier, that not everyone knows you yet.
Probably right.
Okay, so let's give them a shot at you, all right?
Sure.
I want to know something about, sort of the Terry Grier philosophy of education. I'm pitching it to you from education historian Diane Ravitch, who says, charter schools, some of them are good, some of them are bad, but no better than the regular public schools. Poverty influences academic outcomes, and testing to hire and fire teachers and shut down schools is a dumb idea. How much of that do you agree with?
Well, not a lot. Diane's an interesting person, and I listen to her. I have a lot of respect for her. She's shifted her philosophical view probably over the last 2 years more than any one singular educator that I'm aware of. I think poverty plays an important role in a child's background, but I don't think it has to be the determining factor. What makes a difference is a quality teacher in every classroom and an exemplary, outstanding leader as a principal in every school. I know firsthand, because my whole life's been involved around education. I've seen the difference that a quality education can make in the life of impoverished children. And it's phenomenal. And so I think that all children can learn and learn at high rates, regardless of their background or their socioeconomics. Now, to say poverty doesn't play a role and it's not an important factor that we have to work together with partners to overcome would be disingenuous. But it's not the driving
factor. So that's one for one, you and Diane.
Yeah.
Okay, now charter schools are just undermining your efforts to do the job in public education. That's her view.
Well, charter schools give parents a good option. Parents need to have options to have quality education for their children. And a public education has to step up, and we have to provide good quality schools for all of our parents. But even here inside the Houston Independent School District, we have what we call magnet schools. And frankly, some are as good and some are better, I believe, than any charter school in the country. This past year, under top high schools in America list, right here in HISD, we had 3 of our high schools in the top 100. There was no charter schools from Houston or from the Texas area on that list. So we have exemplary schools as well. We just don't have enough of them. We've learned a great deal from charters, and we think some charters do a good job. The one question I have about charters is it's so difficult to close the poor ones down. I can literally close down, with the assistance of our Board of Education, a poor performing public school, which we have done here in Houston. We've closed down a number and started over, rehired principals, rehired teachers, but it's almost impossible to do in a charter school in Texas, regardless of how poor that charter is performing.
Okay, so you're sort of 2 for 2. The last one, Gary, is the one Gary is most fond of, I'm thinking, which is using the testing of teachers to determine whether or not they should receive bonuses, be hired, be fired, or whether schools should be closed down because, teacher performance, rather than just instructional for a teacher. That's her view.
I'm a strong supporter of paying teachers more who get results. And I'm also a strong proponent of paying teachers more who work in difficult to staff positions like math, science, special education, etc. It shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all. But to have 2 teachers standing side by side in the classroom, have the same degree, the same years of experience working with the same children from the same neighborhood, same parental involvement, and one teacher's children are learning at significantly higher rates than the other, I personally believe that teacher needs to be recognized and rewarded.
And I agree. I'm sure David likes the idea of socialism. Everybody gets the same amount if you teach, and there's no variation. So I guess that you would agree with me, teachers for math and science, more difficult subjects where you need more quality and more accomplished people to come in and teach there, you need to pay them more in order to get them to come in the teaching profession.
There's no question, and there's also a number of very important vocational technical courses, for example, in the technology area, where if you don't pay those teachers more, you can't compete with the going rate in the public sector, and that's where you're getting a lot of these teachers.
And it is one of our problems we've had in America, among education generally, is the basically the emancipation of women in the job market. that now women are not restricted to being teachers. Women can be anything. In fact, the majority of people going to law school now are women. And I'm sure that's true in a lot of other professions. Doesn't that probably mean, or has meant for your field, you've had difficulty in recruiting the best and the brightest to go into teaching?
I think a lot of it has to do, quite frankly, and people don't agree with this, and that's okay. I think a lot of it has to do with beginning salaries. You can't decide that you're going to pay someone a beginning salary of $35,000 a year or $40,000 a year and expect your best and brightest to go into that profession. If we want to see better teachers and we want to see brighter students go into the teaching profession, there's no question in my mind we have to have beginning teachers' salaries at a higher level. Now, that doesn't mean that you pay everyone the same. You've heard me already talk about that. I think that you ought to have a different structure for teachers to go into so they don't have to become principals or school superintendents to make more money. And I think you can have a differentiated salary structure by involving teachers and doing it cooperatively, and that's something we're working on in HISD.
Now, David had talked about testing and testing teachers, testing students, and just this week, a huge scandal has arisen in the Atlanta public schools where teachers and administrators, it looks like, have been involved in a systematic effort to change test results for students in order to make them look good so they can qualify for bonuses. Do you have something like that lurking in HISD?
That's sad. And I know the superintendent in Atlanta. I've known her for a long time, and I think that's very sad. And any time that you help students cheat or contribute to students cheating, you're cheating not only the students, you're cheating their family, you're cheating your community, you're cheating your state and country. Yes, we've had cheating going on here since I've been here, and we've uncovered it. The difference is we hired a third party to come in and investigate. And as a result, we dismissed some people. We let people go. And we made some people angry and created some political enemies and adversaries as a result. But it's something we are not going to knowingly condone and put up with. We've gone back and worked with the Texas Education Agency, and we've developed a safety protocol around testing and test security that we believe is as good as you can find in Texas now. For example, every room that we store our testing material in has a video camera that's on 24/7, and only the principal and the test coordinator has a key that goes in there. So heretofore, a teacher may have slipped in, got a copy of the testing material, made copies, and went back and tutored kids as a result. We're monitoring schools now to check and look at the number of erasures that you might see on a test booklet where somebody could have erased, as they did in Atlanta, and changed what kids' answers after the fact.
Let's talk about cheating.
All of that.
Let's talk about cheating. Continue with cheating. As a theme, some would say that the educational product in the state of Texas was cheated as a result of the $4 billion that Texas education lost. Statewide, you, I think, are losing somewhere over 2 years, $240 million. How is it impacting you with staff shortages, class size predictions, loss of enthusiasm, I would guess, would be a problem among educators?
It's created a morale problem, there's no question, because we've had to lay people off, and we've had to go through a reduction in force process, and teachers not knowing where they'd have jobs, and many of these teachers had children and they had other financial obligations, and it's been a tough year in that regard. Now, it's going to impact class size, there's no question. In our business, 85%, or about 85 to 86% of our budget is directly tied to salaries and benefits. And so when you look at cutting money out of our budget, that's where it's going to come from. Now, we've tried to keep it away from the classroom. My first year here, we eliminated about 400 central office jobs. We thought we were top-heavy. And this year we've eliminated 300 more. That's about 700 jobs. Now, the work's not gone away, so we've had people that are certainly working longer, working harder. But we're going to be okay at the central office. Where we've really tried to keep the hurt and pain away is from the classroom, keep it away from our children. But that's been tough because we haven't been able to.
You could be okay, as I understand it, if you raised, given that you have not reached your cap on the tax rate yet, you raise it to the 7 cents that you still have available to you.
Right.
you don't have a problem anymore with money in HISD.
If we raise taxes, and we have the lowest tax rate in Harris County, if we raised taxes to that 7 cents, we would not have to make cuts. And next year, we are going to have to make an additional, it looks somewhere around $48 million in additional cuts next year above what we've made this year. And so I think all of that's going to be on the table. We will either have to have a way to enhance revenue, or we will have to cut deeper. This past year, we cut about $275 per student out of the funds we gave to schools. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of money unless you are a 3,000 student high school the size of Bel Air, and all of a sudden you're looking at a lot of money.
We just passed a drainage fee in Houston to move sewage. Mm-hmm. Why is it that we can't ask our people to pay for education now?
Well, that drainage fee you're talking about would have cost our school district $1.3 million a year that we would have had to pay. We're working with the mayor trying to work out a waiver so that we're not impacted by that immediately. Maybe down the road we might have to pay some of that fee.
But the mayor is right in the respect that infrastructure in the city is important.
Oh,
it's got to be paid for.
There's no
so
question.
If you don't pay for it, and you may not, and if the churches don't pay for it, and the nonprofits don't pay for it, then the average taxpayer ends up getting stuck with the bill, just like David suggests now, Dr. Grier, that you should go out and raise property taxes. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, and you've probably studied the history of HISD, you know my involvement with the district, both favorable and then opposing the district. Basically, we opposed first, then we were in favor. This goes back to the bond issue when Dr. Page was here and instituted a lot of reforms. The voters are okay with spending more money when they think they're getting a bang for their buck. The concern that voters have increasingly shown lately is they don't think they're getting a good deal with government. They think government general tax revenues is being wasted left and right. Obviously, today you've certainly started making the case that you've made tough decisions, cut 700 central administrators since you've come on board. I know that's made a lot of enemies for you, but I applaud you because that's not where the kids learn. You have to be able to make the case for it. So then the question becomes, what are we going to buy? I mean, I've checked statistics from 1987 to 2007. Public school spending in the state went up 142% after inflation. Okay, now how many people's income went up by that? That's a good question. Educational staff salaries during that same period up 71.5% when enrollment in the state was only up 44.5%. So you've got to be able to make the case that we're doing all we can do, and we've cut everything we can cut, and now we have to come back to you because we need more money for X, Y, and Z. And we're going to spend it, in this case, if you give us extra money, it's all going into additional teachers.
Right.
As opposed to,
exactly.
whatever other things, sports, whatever stadiums, whatever the other things that some districts waste their money on. Not that I'm against sports, but that's not the priority.
Yeah.
I think that's how you're going to have to do it. Otherwise, the voters are going to say no. They're going to get mad, and they're going to take it out on you because you have a contract.
I totally agree
on the school board.
I totally agree with you. I'm a huge supporter of athletics. I love the arts. I think that we have to have a well-rounded child. I want to support our gifted education program because I think many times in education, some of the kids that get cheated the most are the very bright kids because we think they're going to be okay, but they aren't being challenged. But one of the real challenges we have in Houston and in a lot of urban settings is that 82% of our kids are on free and reduced lunch. We have kids from over 90 countries who speak 80 languages as a first language. We have a lot of impoverished schools. We have schools where not one child who goes to that school comes to school speaking English. They speak Spanish or another language. So we have schools in our school district, quite frankly, it takes more resources to help those children. They start so far behind to be able to catch them up and then accelerate them so that they can either go to college and graduate without taking a lot of remedial courses or really be part of a strong workforce. That's what's going to be the key to Houston's future. Because if we don't educate all of our children well, Houston's going to look very different 10 to 15 years from now than it looks today.
Well, how did the legislature ignore these appeals that I know you made? I know that the Texas Association of School Boards made the appeal, Texas Association of School Administrators, parent and teacher groups, coalitions to save our schools, all were up there saying, we cannot afford this. Of course, nobody cared. They chose Tea Party voters over inner city kids and their education, apparently.
Well, Until our elected officials in Austin address the franchise tax issue, we're going to have the same problem 4 years from now. We'll have the same problem 6 years from now. There's just such a big gap in revenue in the way that our tax structure is set up in our state.
Does it trouble you that you have to depend so much on residential property tax revenue to fund the schools, which is obviously tied to what happens in the market and the like?
And frankly, I can kind of sit back and smile and say I'm not an elected official, and how you fund this is not my real concern. My concern is adequate funding to be able to provide a good education to our children. Now, you start looking at where we rank as a state right now on a per pupil basis with the rest of the country, and then you start having to ask yourselves questions about our commitment to educating all children. And I'll keep coming back time and time again that I believe that the state and the country that educates all of its children well, particularly its bottom 20% of its children well, that state, that country, they're going to emerge as leaders in either our national economy or internationally. Trying to do more with less, as Arnie Duncan, our Secretary of Education, said, is the new norm. I'm not sure trying to do so much more with so much less when you're dealing with so many children from an impoverished background is the solution.
But people have been abandoning public education for the last 30 years. It's been equated to just being another, Gary said it, another government program. Mm-hmm. It now has to compete in the legislative priorities of budgeting with everything else now, when it used to be a fundamental commitment. Senator Patrick, I have the quote from Houston, says, it's a true cut to an entitlement. Well, where does this come from, this thinking?
I have a great respect for Senator. I know him. I like him. I do. I just don't agree with him on this particular issue. I think education is a civil right. It's the right of all Americans to be educated and be educated well. And I think the freedom of our country, I think our economic standing in the world depends on the quality of education that we deliver to our children. We talked a bit about charters earlier. Charters provide a good alternative, but they're not the solution. If we decided tomorrow to roll up and disband HISD, the charter schools could not come in and take over our school district and educate our children. The charter schools like KIPP and Yes, when they start a school, they start it from the lowest grade and they build it a year at the time. And children apply to go there. What do you do to the children that don't get in? And the ones who apply, there's a self-selection because parents choose to go there. How about the parents who don't choose? Now, they'll argue back, well, we got a waiting list of 900 students. Okay, we've got 204,000 students in HISD and we're growing. So there's got to be, you want parents to have choice. You applaud the good charters. You think the great private schools are doing a fantastic job for the kids who can afford to go there. But public education has been the backbone of this country and will continue to be what separates our country from the rest of the world.
Yeah, well, in this case now we're lagging behind. I was in Australia this spring, and the children were in school. Because it was the equivalent of summer.
Sure.
It was already late July or early August. They were already in school. In fact, I think they go to school almost 11 months a year. The other thing I noted was everybody wears a uniform.
Sure.
No matter what school you go to, everyone has a uniform.
Yeah.
And I think it certainly looks like a more rigorous opportunity for the kids to go to school. So maybe our kids don't go to school enough. Maybe they need to have to go to school more. And I understand if you do that, that means your schools are open more. It means you have more utilities, more expenses, etc. But I think what people are looking for, they look at the numbers, they look at how much the spending has gone up, despite what happened this session, which I understand the increases were cut. Actually, the total month spent in education went up. It only went up by a few $100 million, which isn't enough to take care of the increase in enrollment, and I recognize that. But up till then, school expenditures were going up every year, and the results just weren't there, and people were just getting fed up that we're not getting the bang for the buck. And you've explained, of course, all the issues you deal with. If you only deal with education, not everything else, feeding them, policing them, checking them for drugs with your police force and the like, maybe you'd be able to do a lot more. But that's part of society's problem.
What's interesting, and I've been here almost 2 years, and this year our dropout rate is at the all-time low in the history of the district today for all subgroups. That's Anglo, Hispanic, African American, Asian, and other groups. Our graduation rate is at the all-time high. Our Stanford achievement scores are at the all-time high. The amount of scholarship money offered to our seniors in the last 2 years has almost doubled. The amount of money that we've had contributed to the district from philanthropic and business sources has almost doubled. The percentage of children reading on the third grade, as measured by the Stanford Achievement Test, is an all-time district high. We are getting there. We're making a lot of progress now. It's tough. And when you implement the kind of change it takes to move your district to the next level, you're going to have some morale problems. We're introducing a new level of accountability. And it's not easy work, but it's work that our children deserve. It's work that our city deserves.
You must feel like you're at war, though, in some sense, because not only do we have this ideological conformity in a legislature that is, no one is challenging, abandon public education.
No, that's not true.
But now we have
that's not true.
Gross, complete, grotesque incompetence because we're not even getting a textbook here on time. The State Board of Education, all right, is now being led by a woman from the Woodlands who's is a creationist or an intelligent design lady.
Well,
so how is it that we are stuck here? How do we get out of this paradigm where we don't want to educate those people of color now?
Well, I think you have to educate all children because they're our children. They're Houston's children. They're going to be here. You're not going to make them go away. They're going to be here 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And we have to educate all of our children well if we want the quality of life we enjoy here today to continue and to improve. Now, the issue of the textbooks not being here on time, okay, that's going to create, a burp for all of us. It's something that we don't want to happen. We'll deal with that. We'll get past that. The long term, what we worry about is whether or not we'll have enough funding to provide tutors for kids who need the extra help, whether or not our class sizes are going to get so large that you can't manage the children, whether or not we can have librarians in all of our media center, or whether or not we can have enough guidance counselors to help our kids make good decisions. This is tough work, but it's good work.
And well, you mentioned some ideas of things. You've been raising money from the private sector. Yeah. I think that must be something you brought to the table. Have you thought about doing more of that?
Well, we've raised $145 million this year.
Pretty impressive.
That's not bad in a year's time.
And there is a lot of interest, I think, among the business community for funding, especially funding programs I think are worthwhile. So that's a good thing that you brought.
I'm not sure they're interested in privatizing education, though. I don't think they're interested in that. I think the business community would probably like to see leadership step up and say, we're missing the boat.
Yeah, I think that the business leaders, at least the ones I know and deal with, they like to have a good portfolio of options for parents. Whether it's good private schools or good charter schools, the word is good schools.
Are you still a Robin Hood net funder or receiver?
Yes, we are.
So they take money. The state's taking money from you.
The state takes money
How
from.
much?
It takes a significant amount of money.
So the state cut. If Robin Hood was shut down tomorrow, would you have to get rid of any teachers?
Houston would not have had to probably gotten rid of a lot of teachers, but then you would have other parts of the state that doesn't have our tax base that probably wouldn't have been able to have schools.
That's what the state should be paying for, and kind of letting you have what you're supposed to get and leave you alone.
Well, they have to address the structural deficit at the state level with
which is the bigger problem, frankly.
Right. Which is not anything that anybody wanted to do this legislative session. Nobody wanted to address the fact that business is really not paying their fair share.
It's tough being a superintendent, but I'm sure it's tough being an elected state official as well. You talk about trying to address some of these issues, and there could be a good likelihood that you won't get reelected. I mean, there's nothing easy about any of this kind of work. But what we're trying to focus on is what's best for the children, because what's best for the children of Houston is going to directly impact the quality of life in this city 10 years from now, 15 years from now.
Of course, if you're not getting the bang for the buck, we just, because of that kind of expression, that type of response to your plea, then no one will ever know how to overcome your problems. I mean,
the other side of that nickel is I can't go out and ask the business community for money if we squander that money and we can't produce results. They may give it to you once because you're new and maybe they think it's a decent idea. But if you don't implement with fidelity, if you don't get results, it won't be forthcoming. And I've said for a long time here, not only in Houston, but in San Diego and in North Carolina where I've worked and all over the country, we can do better in education. There's no question we can and we will, and we are. But I promise you, holding people accountable is not something that public schools around this country has been accustomed to.
No, and speaking of that, how do you get along with the teachers union?
Well, you don't believe it or not, I've always liked Gail Fallon. I really do, and I like her and respect her to this day, and I think we have a good relationship, and that might surprise a lot of people. I like her as a person. She's got a good heart. But we need to remember, she also has a role to play as president of that union, and her big job is to make sure that employees are treated with dignity and respect. And so I kind of feel like we need to be treating employees with dignity and respect.
Dr. Grier, my guess is that Gail will help you and Gary get a tax increase passed, but we'll let her. Right. We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar at red, white, and blue. Read about our guests and watch the shows along with our follow-up discussion. And until next time, get informed and get active.